Inside your bedroom, we stopped counting the days, lost in the rhythm.
Hey everybody! I am trying to decide if I want to make another cup of coffee before I film this video or not. So, I don't know. I'm in between. What do we think? Hi, Jujin. All right, here we go. Now that we have coffee and I have everything prepped, we are going to do an indie author Q&A today. So I compiled these questions from a lot of places, and some of these are like old. Like I went back and I remembered that I had some author specific questions on a couple videos on YouTube and a few TikTok posts from a couple weeks ago. So I went back and compiled those. I also put out a post pretty recently asking for questions that are indie author specific on my Instagram and on TikTok. So I also took questions from those places and piled them all together. So most of these are indie author specific, but some of them are just for fun. So let's go. The first question I got was, how do you know when it is finished? That is a really difficult question because I think all of us authors, especially if we're planning to publish what we're writing, I think we get really nitpicky because it is kind of nerve-wracking putting your heart on paper and then putting that out in the real world for anyone and everyone to scrutinize. That can be really difficult. So I think in that instance, authors, and myself included, fall into a pitfall of like a big circle. Like we're just revising, editing, writing, revise, like constantly. And so there does come a point where you have to decide this is good enough. It's never going to be perfect. That is always the first thing that I tell people. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to go back through your book after it's published months later and find a typo. That's just what happens. Or you're going to grow and decide I should have written that differently, but you can't because it's already published. So for me, deciding when it is finished is when I feel myself fall into that wheel. And sometimes that happens at different stages. I always, after I finish writing a book, I have like a set process. I let it sit, I read through it without changing anything. I just read straight through it like I'm a reader. And then I go through and make the edits based on my notes. And then if I need to, I go back through and I do a read through and edit again. But typically I only go back through my work maybe a total of like 3 times when it really gets to that polished part. That's when I start doing like line edits and start looking at nitpicky things. I really only go through it 3 times at that point. And that doesn't necessarily include when I'm doing formatting and catch things. So I think this is a really long way to answer this question, and it's only the first question, but I think you just have to get to a point where you're just tinkering with it and you're just changing words for the sake of changing words and not really changing a lot of story elements, if that makes sense. Yeah, so basically it's never going to be perfect and you just have to decide when it's good enough. Next question. What book are you reading right now? Let me grab it because I am still reading Iron Flame. Since the holidays hit, I've been kind of a slow reader, which is not normally the way things go for me. Usually I blaze through reading and writing at the holidays, but this year I've taken some time off. I already released, I've already said it a few times, I took most of December off just for my own mental health, just to get a break because I haven't taken a break since I've started. And so I am still slowly but surely working through Iron Flame. I'm liking it so far. I'm about halfway in. I'm doing like tandem reading and listening to the audiobook, but that is what I am reading right now. Next is, what is one moment that made you feel like you truly grew as an author? Gosh, that is really hard because there's been a bunch of different moments Might need a second to think on that one. I think the moment when I realized that I had grown, like when I really felt it, because I know I've grown a lot and I have long way to go. And I can think of all the ways I've grown. But I think the first time that I felt it was when I went for the second year in a row to a local author. It wasn't really a conference. What was it? It was kind of a conference, like a festival, where there were a bunch of us and we were selling our books all together, and we got to talk to the public, sign books and stuff, and then mingle amongst each other. I've gone to this event twice now, and I remember the first year, it was my first year I had something out, published. I had 2 books out, and I was really nervous because most of the people there were a lot older than me or had a lot of books out. And I remember feeling really intimidated and not really knowing exactly what to expect and what I was doing. And then the second year, when I came back to that same event, I remember sitting down and talking with other authors there and looking at their works. And we always exchange and I think talk and look at how other authors are doing their author business and how they're running things. And the second time, I remember looking at some different authors and thinking like, wow, if they would do this instead of that, then they would take off in this way. I remember being able to tell, like, if this author only posted this like specific gimmick, this marketing thing that they're doing right now in front of me, if they took exactly that, filmed it on TikTok, they would be doing really, really well. And I remember realizing that I could see those things in other people. I remember that was a moment I felt like I had really grown, because those were things I was doing for myself also. And then being able to give my advice and say something to there were a couple different authors there I talked to. And for my advice to see it come into play for them and then be helpful to them was really, really strange, because I do not consider myself an authority on anything. That's why I don't give a lot of author and writing advice, because I think it's so subjective and it really depends on the person, what you're writing, your platform, yada, 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 yada. Take it with a grain of salt. But to be able to see that work in other ways and to see that in other people made me realize that I had at some point seen it and done it for myself. And that was, I don't know, interesting, strange. All right, next up. What is on your TBR right now? So my TBR is like an entire shelf of my author bookshelf. I have a great big bookshelf over here behind me, and one side of it is D&D stuff for my husband, and the other side of it is all my author stuff. And I have a whole shelf of books there that are my to be read, along with other things I have like a list for. But let's just look at the books that are actually on my TBR shelf. So these are pretty much all organized from left to right in the order that I think I'm going to end up reading them in. I stopped reading Throne of Glass just to get on the hype for Iron Flame. So once I finish that, I am back on to Crown of Midnight and on to Throne of Glass series. So I'll read that series through. I have a really fun project in the works for some of these books up here. Next, I'll probably go to Bethany Atazada's The Stolen Kingdom and maybe read all of that series. A second story by Jen. I'm really excited. Jen is here on YouTube also. Jen's bookshelf. So is Bethany. And then I adore everything Carissa Broadbent that I've read. So I cannot wait to read Daughter of No World. So I got all 3 of those for Christmas. And then I'll have to get to House of Earth and Blood. I need to get to the Crescent City series at some point. I still haven't gotten to Shadow and Bone. I think this book has been up here for a very long time. Same thing with the 5th season. Breathless is also by a friend of mine, Roland Nevels, and I am excited to read that. This cover is beautiful. I love that. And this is a book one of my counseling friends gave me, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And I've picked through this a little bit, so I kind of have read it. I'm reading it a little by little. The chapters are really short. So far, it's good. But that is my TBR shelf. On to the Next question. What book are you most excited to write in 2024? I am extremely excited to write all of the books in my lineup this year. It's a new era, writing much more grown-up things, a lot more spice, so much more romance. I am excited. I think, I don't know. I have loved writing Curse of Wings and Darkness. I've loved that for the romance. I think that might end up being my favorite book I've written in 2024 by the end of 2024. What I'm really excited to move on to, though, is to write Trial of Flame and Wings, which is in a fantasy world. I haven't written a fantasy book like that in quite some time, and I've missed that a ton. I love the world building with fantasy. Fantasy is my favorite genre to write, and funnily enough, most of the books that I've published are more of an urban setting. It's an urban fantasy. So I am really excited to get back to a fantasy world with Trial of Flame and Wings. It's like Serpent and the Wings of Night, speaking of Carissa Broadbent. It's very much like that, except dragons. And I'm really excited to write that one. I should start writing that in a couple months. Next question is, what is your advice for authors trying to write while still working full-time? So, little disclaimer, I am still working full-time. Everything YouTube, all the stuff you see, all of my books, my author platform, it is a full-time job, honestly, the hours I spend in it, but that is very much an additional job to my day job. I work right now as a school counselor, and I work full-time. So I've got a lot on my plate. So as far as my advice for people that are trying to be an author and do all of that stuff while still working full-time, my advice, one, give yourself a lot of credit because that is a whole lot. And also give yourself some grace. You're not going to be able to do all of it all the time. You can do both of those things. However, you cannot do them both all the time, 100%. You're going to have to move in some phases, which is how I structure things. And structure is the key here. My advice would be set yourself a schedule, decide what is actually feasible for you all the time, what is feasible for me some of the time, just like my phases. When I'm drafting, I have to lessen some of the other things in my life. Like I go out less when I'm in a drafting phase. I eat out less also when I'm in a drafting phase. I spend a lot more time at home, which means I have to lessen my workload in other areas. So take a look at what you can do, what's feasible all the time, what's feasible part of the time, like maybe for a month at a time. And I would start creating a schedule around those two ideas and defend your time. It is so easy for work and like play to blend together and suddenly you're working all the time. And same thing the other direction. It can be really easy to be pulled away from your work sometimes. So defend your boundaries. Like if you write a couple evenings a night, make sure that that time is blocked out. Even if you have to put it on a calendar, block it out as protected time. That way you know you get it and just stick to that. So definitely look at what's doable for you, because if it's not doable for you, it's gonna drag. It's not gonna feel natural and it's gonna be really difficult and you're gonna burn out incredibly fast. But I really do think structure and a dose of reality is probably the best way to approach setting any of those kinds of schedules. Next question. What is the best book that you read in 2023? I've already talked about this book a little bit. Let me go and grab it because I love it so much. Oh, okay. My favorite read of 2023 is Serpent and the Wings of Night. This right now is my all-time favorite book, I'd say. I love Carissa Broadbent. I love the way she writes. And I loved this story. What I really liked about this and took from this going into Curse of Wings of Darkness, my vampire romance, is I adored the way the vampires were written. I love that everything about this story and the characters in this book was very gray. Like, the vampires were not entirely, because they did have their own spin, but they were very much traditional lore vampires. And I really liked that. Rather than like your sparkly, trendy, teeny weeny ones that you see in places like Twilight and stuff. It was just a different spin on vampires that we haven't seen mainstream in a while. And I adored that. And I definitely took that theme, that traditional vampire, and decided that was going to be what I wanted my vampire to be like in Curse of Wings and Darkness. And so that was probably like the only thing I took from this book. But I adore this book. I'm a huge Carissa Broadbent fan, read everything that she wrote. The next question is, what is the biggest challenge of being a self-published author? This is interesting because I think that the most challenging part can also be the most rewarding part of being self-published. The hardest part of being self-published is having to decide everything yourself and do it all yourself, especially when you're just starting out and you don't necessarily know what the best decision is. And I say that that can be really rewarding because I've actually grown to really enjoy doing it all myself. I have enjoyed making every little decision. I like that, but it can come with a lot of risk also because, like I said, you don't, especially when you're starting out, you don't necessarily know what the best decision is. But the reality is that the best decision for you could be the worst decision for somebody else. And I kind of enjoy that because it's a place of growth. It's customizable, and there really are a lot of resources out there. When I was first starting out into self-publishing, I had a hard time finding those resources. And the ones I were finding were very successful people. And to be honest, some of the things that really successful indie authors are doing are actually not that accessible to people just starting out. And a lot of that is because of finances. Self-publishing can be as cheap or as expensive as you make it. And it definitely pays if you can put more money into it. However, when you're first starting out, it is not a financially good decision to do that. Even though some of those things may make you more successful and get your book out there further, they're just not the best. I wouldn't advise an author just starting out to do some of those things. I just think it's too much of a risk. So it's definitely a risk versus reward kind of thinking. So I would say that is the most difficult part of being self-published, is trying to weigh those elements and to make those decisions for yourself, because that can be a lot of pressure. Next question is kind of a fun one. What song do you have on repeat right now? For me, that is, I don't really know. It's probably something by Bad Omens though. Really like Bad Omens. That was something that I discovered on TikTok in 2023 and have been obsessed over ever since. Next, what bookish thing would you like to do this year? So there are a couple bookish things I want to do that I have set goals for. I thought it would be more fun to pick something that's not already on my goal list for 2024. If you're interested in what my goals are for 2024, all the things I'm trying to accomplish, go watch that video, because I do have a video here on YouTube where I set my goals for 2024 and those are there. But a bookish thing I would like to do this year that is not a part of those goals already set would be that I would kind of like to take a writing retreat. I've never done that. Whether that be like me and my husband go on a little trip and a lot of the time is me spent writing, or whether that's me going off by myself, I don't really know, but I would love a writing retreat. I have a couple things in mind, nothing set in stone. I have an idea for a couple trips. Maybe I'll do a couple trips, I don't know. But I just think it would be really fun. And there is something to be said about going and writing in a different place than where you typically work. It can really like jog your memory, get some juices flowing. It's just a different scenery can sometimes inspire you. And I like that idea. So I'd say that is a bookish thing I'd like to do this year, is to try to take some kind of writing retreat. Next would be, what advice would you give someone interested in self-publishing? Funnily enough, we actually talked about this a little bit. I guess we talked more about the advice I would not give somebody self-publishing, and I stand by that. Don't necessarily do everything that you see a really successful self-published author do, but a good starting point, I think, is to take a look at other self-published authors. Specifically, look at authors that are writing in the same genre as you. Look at what is doing well for them. For a lot of us authors, especially indie authors, it's the TikTok community. And I grew a lot when I first started out into that marketing, when I was really marketing and figuring it out. What worked well for me was taking a look at what another successful indie author was doing. And this was an author, Emily Blackwood on TikTok. Go follow her. She's great. And her books are good. But she had just taken off, had just had a viral TikTok and was doing well. And I took a look at why that was. What elements of her TikToks did people seem to enjoy? And what elements of her TikToks was I seeing in other people's TikToks? So taking a look at what authors that are similar to you are doing and what's working well for them. Also, just honestly reaching out to other indie authors. I've learned a lot. Even now, I do this routinely now, where I ask other indie authors a question. I pick their brain, so to speak. Like, what do you think about this subject? Or what do you think about this writing tool? Or what is something that's going well for you right now? And why do you think that is? Just all kinds of questions, because starting a conversation can get you in a lot of places. It's also networking. Networking, especially for us indie authors, is huge, because being a writer in general, but being an indie author where all of the financial burden, all of the decision making falls on your shoulders, that can feel really lonely sometimes. So reaching out to other indie authors and networking and making friends online or in person, if you have author friends in person, can be really helpful in getting connected, not feeling so alone. I would say that's probably why I started doing my writing sprints on Sundays here on YouTube, because I was joining other authors' writing sessions online and found such a nice community there. So community is really important. So I would say just reaching out to other indie authors, see what's working for them, and don't copy it, but mimic it, if that makes sense. Take elements of that and make it fit for yourself, your own author platform, who you are. And honestly, just be authentic online, be yourself, express yourself, engage with people who are engaging with you, and reaching out to people who have some similarities, because author friends are gold. They really are. And it can be really important to have them and have the mutual support. So I guess that would be my advice. Oh, and read. Read as much as you can, because there is nothing that will make you a better writer besides just writing and trying things than reading things. So keep reading. And that is pretty much everything for this video. I made this cup of coffee, didn't even touch it the whole video. It's just sat here, but I'm gonna go drink some coffee. I think do a little bit of video editing, because that's about what I have left for the day, and see what's next. But if you have any other questions that I didn't answer in this video, leave them below in the comments. Give me a like if you enjoyed this. Subscribe to my channel, because I post a lot of bookish content, like 3 times a week. Join me on Sundays at 8:20 Central Standard Time for writing sprints. Come join me there. It's a lot of fun. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.